read about a novel in Olivia Lang's A Lonely City. I think that is the first place I read about it because I remember making like a little. I was in a hotel and I made a little note to myself about it. And I was
This is the Andy Warhol novel
a
called
yeah, yeah,
A Novel.
yeah, and I was interested in the idea of working on something and like significantly contributing to something, and then that not having your name on it, sadly. And I was interested in that idea far more than I was initially interested in Warhol. That kind of research and things came later. But yeah, it's I guess because I'm a writer and that's what I do. And even if I write the worst book in the world, I can still I get satisfaction from calling it my own or whatever. So the idea of not being able to do that struck me as like particularly sad and also particularly modern, as kind of like right now we see a lot of people's work being taken away from them, like being taken off streamers, or people not recognizing films they've made, or whatever, that kind of thing. So as creative work kind of becomes more devalued, I think this is an idea that's still worth exploring.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. It made me think about working on a book. I guess ghostwriters do this,
Mm.
obviously,
Yeah, yeah.
but they know what they're getting into. You
Yeah.
know, they're paid for their labor, and they know they're
Mm.
not going to be. I mean, sometimes their name is sort of below the title,
Mm.
somewhere. But I think it's not that common for
No.
somebody to work on a like a work of literature
Mm.
and to be completely removed
Definitely. Yeah.
from authorship. But when it comes to visual art, in the world of visual art, you hear about this thing all the time. Like
Yeah.
people laboring to create these things that like Jeff
Mm.
Koons then like puts
Mm.
his name on.
And
Like,
Damien Hirst,
yeah,
yeah.
they do this. They just have like, and I guess like James Patterson does this, right? There are certain authors I think who do this. They hire people essentially to just write their books and then they just put their name on it. Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I I wonder, I was interested in what it was like to be inside that, to have done the work and to kind of then, the product emerges out, the product or the creative output emerges out into the world and like it has nothing to do with you. I thought it would be such kind of a lonely feeling. And then, a lot of my work is kind of like about the idea of like knowing what goes on behind the scenes of like celebrity or a certain thing that you might appear glamorous. So yeah, I that's where the initial idea came from.
So how interested? Because it's fascinating to me to think about the fact that you dove into this, like the world of Andy Warhol, the factory,
Hmm.
and it's obviously like world historic from an art history perspective. It's definitely interesting and has been chronicled a lot through the years. But I'm wondering if it could have been almost anyone, or did it have to be Warhol? Do you know what I'm saying? Like if the idea at the heart of this book has to do with this issue of authorship and sort of being inside, like how big of a fan of Warhol are you, and how interesting to you in a genuine way is that world, or did it become so as you kind of got to work on this?
It's interesting because I've done the book has been out in the UK since March, so the UK and Ireland. I've done a couple of readings and things, and like people have come up to me and been like, I was such a huge fan of Warhol as a teenager, and I didn't feel that way. Although like I'm quite like familiar with his work. I was familiar with his work before I began this. I'd seen quite a few of the films and things, and my kind of entry point was in that scene where the kind of factory Viva, I think, appears in Midnight Cowboy, that film. And I remember watching that in college and being like, oh, I've seen Chelsea Girls. I really enjoy the films, so that was an entry point to me. I wasn't like a devotee, and like a lot of the material I read, like the Edie and American Girl, which I know many people are a huge fan of that book. That was new to me, and now I'm a huge fan of that book. And yeah, a lot of the biographies and things I had not encountered before, but yeah, it was one of those subjects that got more interesting as I kind of worked on it. I didn't get bored.
Yeah,
I could have kept researching forever, and then never written the book.
right. Just always,
Temptation,
it's very. Yeah, I
you
was going
know?
to say it's very alluring, that process
Mm,
of just eternal research.
yeah.
But it made me. I think what this book does to anybody who's reading it is it causes them to evaluate or reevaluate how they feel about Warhol.
Mm.
Not that he's even that central to the book. He's sort of
No.
like this ghostly peripheral figure, which I like as a choice. The book is really about these young girls who work in his service essentially and who are part of this scene and who are erased or anonymous in terms of their contributions to his art and
Yeah.
to the work that he, this novel in particular. And I got to say, like when I was thinking about it, I was like, yeah, I'm like generally, I guess in a general sense, I find his work interesting. I think where it interests me the most is how predictive it was and how like tuned into the culture and to human nature it was. I mean, you really can look back on it and see how it predicted the world that we live in. The problem I have with it is that I don't really know if it predicted good things.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was like, I don't know if it was a critique. I don't know if Andy Warhol was critiquing in any kind of serious way these things like this. We're all going to be famous for 15 minutes in the future.
Yeah.
You
Or do you
know,
think he delighted in it?
that I kind of think he delighted in it, and I don't know if I do. And then like painting like commercial products and logos and stuff. Like I guess that was somehow tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
I hope it was.
The
you
thing
know.
is, like, I've been asked to write I wrote a piece for The Guardian or The Observer, one of them, about, did Warhol predict the time we live in now and, influencers and everything. And to a certain degree, but the difference between influencers now and like his kind of factory people is that like they weren't selling you anything other than themselves. They were just selling, like Edie was just selling herself, the idea of herself, whereas influencers now are selling you a lot of stuff, like, fame is associated with like selling. And in the way it was back then, I feel like it's almost a little bit like naive, like Edie and Onadine, who's like mentioned in the book, they had very turbulent, like personal lives. There was like drug addicts and had like huge, like personal problems in their own lives. Whereas now, like the kind of fame we encounter is like very like sanded down, very pleasant, very like presentable. Like it's also like fame is so controlled now. Whereas I feel like back then there was a total, it was a chaos almost. Which is different. It's really gone through like the modern celebrity has gone like through a huge like transformation.
Yeah. I find it sad. I find like the whole culture of everybody vying for everybody else's attention and like talking into these like the talking into the phone video does something to me.
The front facing.
Like just like, hey, how are you, everybody? Like, and everyone's doing this, and I think like this, it makes me sad. That's how I feel. It makes me sad. It makes me unnerved. I'm just like, because I can't, I just don't like something in me, like the alarm bell goes off. And then when I think about what Warhol was up to and like Edie Sedgwick, and it feels like quaint almost.
Yeah, it does. It feels almost innocent,
Yeah.
even though their lives are, like I said, were like extremely tumultuous. Like I feel, but yeah, I don't think that they recognize themselves as like sellable products in the way that we're doing now. We're evaluating ourselves and being like, can I go online and like do that thing where I can sell myself or front facing camera and it could be associated with this product, whatever. And I do think it's leading to like a pretty boring culture where everyone has to be like extremely presentable all the time or something, like advertising yourself in a way that I don't understand.
It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Who wants to live in that world? And you know what? A lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people take to it like ducks to water, and it makes me feel like I am an extraterrestrial. Like I look around, I'm just like, this can't be right. And apparently it is, and I'm the weirdo. But anyway, so
Good to be a weirdo.
yeah, right. I'll take weirdo. I'm happy to be a weirdo if that's going to be the reality we have to live in. But you are doing in this book something that I think is really cool. It's a cool thing for fiction writers to do, and it's a proper thing, I think, for fiction writers to do, which is to imagine the lives of two of the four women who created this novel for Warhol by transcribing like an incredible amount of audio tape, right? That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I want to say two of the women who worked on it are kind of lost to history. We don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
But you have done the imaginative work of trying to create and flesh out three-dimensional human beings who worked on this through the characters of May, who is the protagonist of the novel, and her friend Shelley. And I love that. It's like a reclamation project, right?
Yeah. I did think of it in that way, and in that way, it took me a little while to kind of find the voice for this and to figure out exactly what I wanted to do and things. But I once I had an understanding that I wanted it to be about May and Shelley, these two girls in particular, then I knew that I knew how to do it almost when I had decided that Warhol would be like more of a background figure. But yeah, he's in there, and a lot of his ideas are in there. But I didn't want him to overpower the narrative. The thing I think I keep comparing it to is Jaws. Don't show the shark, because if you show the shark, like it will ruin the rest of the movie. It's so much more kind of tense and things if he's not there,
Yeah.
in respects.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes the book more propulsive in some way.
Mm-hmm.
You're almost waiting for it, but you're not like satisfying that itch. I mean, in bits and pieces. I want to say his name only appears twice in the book. Is that right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, his nickname really Drella?
Yeah.
Like that's
Great
what people.
combination of Cinderella and Dracula.
Okay. Term of endearment,
So
right?
there you go.
But the other thing I think that choice, obviously, it foregrounds these women, and it makes the novel about them and their like emotional lives and their interests and their narratives. But it also, I think, in a way, like causes the reader to really evaluate Warhol. And I think like one of the things I read when I was prepping was that you're interested in how power works.
Yeah.
And, Warhol's, portrayed, especially in the popular culture and like movies about him, like, the movie The Doors or
Yeah.
the Basquiat movie is this kind of like soft-spoken, feeble, kind of like, what's the word? Gentle, But what it made me think about when I was reading your novel, is it made me think of The Godfather, of all things. And the performance by Marlon Brando, where he's the most powerful mobster around, and he speaks in this very soft whisper. And I think like one of the insights of that movie, and one of the reasons it's successful, is because it sort of underscores how when you're really powerful, you don't have to raise your voice. Everybody's leaning in. And so that's kind of maybe that's how Warhol was, right?
Yeah, and it was interesting because I did not want to write a book where he was like a monster. I wanted to write a book that I read so many different things. I read a lot of biographies of him that were praising. I spoke to different people that were, friends of his. And you get different accounts, and that's the interesting thing, like if you speak to anyone in anyone's life, you're going to get different accounts of who they were, that's what's so interesting about reading biographies, I think, because if you read a couple of them, you realize, this person was a different person to every single one of these people, so like to write a portrayal where he was like straightforwardly a monster would have been wrong. But what I was interested in exploring was, like I said there about you said about the power, was how everyone kind of reacted to him, and I found that the most interesting thing. I think there's a line where like everyone stood up and seemed more alive when they were kind of talking to him, like even when he's not there, he's still kind of directing everything, and he's still there when they perform, they still want his attention. And I studied theater in college, and I understand that. Like I understand like being in a group of people and trying to act natural and thing, but you still want the attention of one particular person, whether it is like your lecturer and things. And I think that is I think that's like extremely interesting. And I wrote a story collection previous to this, and I feel like that's what I sort of wrote about as well, like how power kind of operates in the world. And I think it's something I'm always going to write about.
Because like this is interesting to me. Like there's a line in the book where I believe Shelley says, the world can turn you into a real monster. You have to turn into a monster to get what you want. And this echoes a thought that I've had repeatedly throughout my adult life as I have been trying to get what I want. And as I have been trying to like navigate
Mm.
the quote unquote adult professional world,
Yeah.
which is not something that comes easily to me at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think it comes easily to a lot of
Mm.
artists.
No.
But for somebody like Warhol, who seemed so shy and
Mm.
meek, he kind of put on that guise
Mm.
anyway. Yet he was able to get what he wanted.
Mm.
And I'm
It's
always
kind of
fat.
extraordinary. Like, that is something I do find kind of like when you read about his like ascent, from where he came from. Like, he was from Pittsburgh, and he didn't have like wealthy parents, or to rise to that kind of level like now, like it would be almost impossible. And he still somehow did it, and held that power for however long, for decades. I did find that fascinating.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you. That's the question I had for you because I don't know this history of his
Mm.
life, but how did he ascend? How could somebody I guess the bigger question is like, was this sort of shy, retiring, whispery talking Andy Warhol, was that kind of a performance? And was he
Mm.
maybe more assertive privately? And did he obviously had to be strategic and he had to be,
Mm. He was
don't,
strategic, definitely. Like, and I feel like that was like, I think one of his gifts, like, and I really do, I think this is like underestimated across the board, but like he could really spot talent or like star power in other people. And like, I think he saw it, in Edie, who was like electrifying in front of the camera. And then, Onadine, for example, or like Candy Darling, he did find all these people, and I think that was just like something he was very, very good at. And I feel like people don't um think of that as like a talent, but it is a talent. But I think that from what I've read, like a relationship with him or a friendship could be very kind of back and forth. And, he had his favorites, and then the favorites were out and the new favorite was in. And like he was very attracted too because he grew up without money and believing himself to like be ugly. Was very attracted to like beauty and wealth. That's where he kind of, Edie was, the his perfect foil in some ways. So yeah, it's impossible to know if like if he was cruel, or well, he was cruel. But yeah, sorry, I'm forgetting the question.
well, no, but I mean, all of it speaks to the question, which is how he did this and whether or not
Mm.
he, like this idea of whether or not you have to be a monster to get what you
Mm.
want from the world.
Hmm.
And I think especially in the arts, like the level of selfishness,
Hmm.
this sort of ruthless
Hmm.
approach to one's time. You have to sort of like elbow away every distraction and all the different people who might need your attention to at least some degree in order to get the work done. And
It's
then
interesting because it's a rise. This question is coming up again and again. I know there was a book out this year called Monsters by Claire Dedera.
I talked
Uh,
to her. I talked to
oh
her on
yeah,
the
yeah.
show. Yeah.
And so she probably had some great answers. And then there's another book called Art Monsters and Things. Um, so yeah, like the like doesn't isn't that what like women aren't monstrous enough? That's from the Jenny Awful book, that you have to be an art monster. You have to be incredibly selfish and things like that. But I'm like extremely, you know, like wary of ambition. Like I don't.
Me too.
I think as we kind of see the how things have progressed in the world, I think everyone's like, wary of ambition in some ways. This is where it's gotten us to, all this accumulation. But I feel, and I'm wary of ambition in myself. I think I really wanted to write a novel where the main character is sort of surprised by what they're capable of. And I think there's like a couple of scenes where May she is genuinely like didn't think she was able to do the kind of one or two bad things she does. And I think that's really I think that can happen to you throughout your life as you try and get what you want, or you get closer to what you want all the time. You can consistently surprise yourself, or even let yourself down a little
I
bit.
think there's a social component too.
Yeah.
Where I feel like if you're looking out at the culture and you're seeing this sort of behavior reflected back at you, or if
Mm-hmm.
you're in a more closed circuit, with
Mm-hmm.
other people who are behaving in this way,
Yeah.
like a certain line of work or office culture or whatever it is, then it can make it seem like it's okay. Like this is just what people do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things about ambition and about like the climb that freaks me out so much is how it can reduce human relationships to transactions.
Yeah.
Like everything's transactional. like underneath, and like you start to wonder like how much of any exchange you have with a human being is even remotely authentic or
Yeah.
rooted in like any kind of warmth. It's just people trying to get what they want, and if they have to be like nice to you and put on a show to get there, they will, and maybe you will too, you know, or I will too. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
that's where it starts to get weird to me, is like
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
every relationship starts to feel transactional. Like that can't be the answer. Like that can't be why we're on this planet, you know?
No. And I think that that is like a worrying thing, about sort of influencer culture as well. Like, if you start doing that, you're treating yourself as like a separate entity. Like there's almost two selves, the managed outside self and the kind of interior self, which is more uncertain or less confident or whatever. And the two kind of things are like can't be reconciled. So you must feel like a huge amount of like disassociation from yourself. And I even feel like that's kind of like the friendships I wanted to portray in the book is that she has that father figure character, Mikey, and
I
he
love
has.
Mikey. I love Mikey, by the way.
I love Mikey too.
Well, but no, and let me just say, I got to interject because it's germane to what we're talking about. Is that Mikey at some point says something, and I'm paraphrasing, or maybe it's May thinking about Mikey, about how he's like, in the eyes of the culture, kind of a loser.
Yeah,
This is not a guy who succeeded in any kind of conventional way. And then the last line is like, he was the smartest guy I knew.
yeah, yeah.
Something like that. And I was like, yeah, I mean, like there's this issue of resistance to cultural values. And I think I just have an abiding sense that somebody who is operating in resistance to the tide, whatever it ends up costing them, is heroic to me.
Yeah,
So,
and
and
they're
Mike,
usually right.
yeah,
History usually proves them right.
yeah.
Um,
And Mikey is emblematic of that. So anyway,
but I wanted to write Mikey because he is like an sort of uncomplicatedly, like certainly more good than May because she's young and doesn't really know what she's doing, and he's an uncomplicated good character in some ways. And I think, he's almost like the novel is full of doubles, but he's almost Warhol's double because he is interested in art and he shows like May these kind of things and things, but he doesn't have the power Warhol has. Like he doesn't have the friends, he doesn't have the parties. And I think at one point she's talking about typing up the novel, and he's like, he's like, it's not writing, it's eavesdropping. Like like he's recording his friends, and for what purpose is he recording these kind of people for? And yeah, I just kind of wanted to have him as like an outsider view of like, like what are these friendships, and are they friendships if you're like willing to kind of use your friends to further your own name? Because that is the thing. Like a novel is an extremely murky book, and like there's like sections of it where like people are like very high, and like Onadine, they're even asks for the tape recorder to be turned off at like one point, and like I
and
think like
can you for listeners, can you explain who Ondine like
oh yeah,
was?
he was one of Warhol's set in the 60s, and he was called the Pope. He's in Chelsea Girls, and he was like a big talker and things. And yeah, like Onadine was like a good friend of his. Like this was an interesting time because I think these people were really his friends. Like they weren't like people he was photographed beside at parties. There wasn't any furthering of, I need to be seen with this person. I think this person was like a genuine friend. Like, and there's this anecdote where he meets Onadine later at a funeral, and Onadine's like quit drugs, whatever, and he's like, he says some, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like he seems so average, without drugs, he seems so normal, so it's like, just like an ordinary guy, with that he wasn't on speed, but like yeah, so there is this part where like they were asking for the tape recording to be turned off, like Edie wasn't well, he wasn't well. And like they were doing all kinds of things, and like that's like a very like the idea of that is like very interesting to me. Like that's almost like a precursor to reality TV. Like when you profiting off someone's misery and like watching them and enjoying their kind of torment and like pain, and feeling through what they're feeling. It's incredibly dark, but like I really do think he did it first.
Yeah, well, and I think there's something authentic about it, and there is something like interesting about it. And as you were saying this about Onadine, like getting sober and Warhol finding him boring.
Mm.
It's dark.
Mm.
But I think of like musicians.
Mm.
You think of like your favorite rock band, and like the best shit they ever did was when they were so fucked up. And
Yeah.
then they get sober, and you're sort of like, it's not as interesting. I liked you better when you were miserable, which is a horrible thing to say to somebody whose like health is and life is hanging in the balance. But right, you know?
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to know that as an artist as well, like as a writer or like someone who does creative work or whatever. You're not exactly sure how exactly like how much you should like put yourself through the ringer, you know? Like should you like suffer and like put yourself through kind of a lot so you feel like your art will be good. I remember years ago I was trying to finish a story, and a friend of mine was like, you need to get like a bad job and like a bad relationship. And she was like, because you're funniest and you're best when you're miserable. And I was like, oh no.
Well,
But
see,
it's
this
true.
is,
It can be very
yeah.
true.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it is interesting, this idea of people being at their most interesting or their most creative, like vitally creative when they are, for example, not sober, or when they are in some sort of state of unhappiness. Or
Yeah.
it's interesting, like to think of somebody like, wow, they're actually their most authentic selves when they're on speed in a certain sense, because maybe some of the inhibitions are down.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something like so fascinating and real about this person when some switch is turned off in their brain neurochemically, and then when that switch is flipped back on, it's like, oh, something's lost. Like
Yeah.
that might be true, and yet it's a way better option for that person in the long-term sense. So
Yeah.
this stuff is complicated. It's fascinating to me to think of like, wow, you might do your best work as a writer of fiction when you're in a shitty relationship. maybe the humor, yeah, maybe the humor is there. So as long as you can stand it, I guess that might be
Right? As long as you
something
can
to
stick
seek
it
out. So I want to ask you about this idea of being in a scene, because that's very much what this book is about. May and Shelley and all the girls, in particular the girls, I think are the focus of your novel, who work in Andy Warhol's orbit at this the Midtown location of the factory. I didn't realize this because I'm not as, I'm not as read up on the history of Andy Warhol as you are, but I didn't realize that the factory actually moved.
Yeah, it moved like 3 times, I think.
Yeah. But the part of the part of the factory's history that your book focuses on, I think it was on 47th Street.
Yeah, 47th East.
So it was at its Midtown location, and I think it was really, this time period that you're talking about was really when Warhol was ascendant, right? His star was rising. Things were maybe at their coolest. It kind of tracks when...
It's definitely the coolest,
Yeah.
Like before it became, a business, like before it became like a money-making enterprise, when it was still like a sort of, cool place to like hang out. Like that was like, that is the thing that people are like, oh, did you love this time, or did you like love the 1960s? And I like a lot of like 1960s films and things, but I don't worship the time. But like when I was reading about this, I was extremely jealous of like the amount of time like they all got to hang out with their friends and like pay very little rent and like hang around, and all the creativity that kind of arose from that, which I feel like we just don't get anymore.
That's right. That's right. I do love the 60s.
Yeah.
Worship might be too strong a word, but I think it's a very like the cultural history of the 1960s will never not be fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And what I want to ask you about, because you're sort of, the book sort of tracks the Warhol scene in its heyday, but also I think as it maybe tips and then starts to like slide into whatever it became, where it was more of a business, as you say. And it's interesting to me because whenever I was kind of growing up and seeing a band or something, there was always some asshole who was like, it was way better like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You should have been there back when, I remember seeing them in like a hallway when there was like 5 people there. It was way better. I'm never, the point is that I'm never there when it's actually good.
Always miss out.
I always miss out. And I think that it's interesting to wonder about when a quote unquote scene is at its best, and do the people who are involved in it even know? Are these things only visible with the benefit of hindsight? Maybe they did know as they were in it that there was something really cool going on, But do you ever know that it's going to be something that like art history records and that is remembered all these years later, and that Nicole Flattery is going to be writing a novel about? Do you
I'm
know what I'm
sure that's
saying?
what they wanted to know.
Yeah, right.
No, I feel it's, yeah, very interesting, and like a scene is so attractive. Like I feel like that is like when May goes in, and it's obviously like a replacement for her family, like which is like, and lots of, there were a lot of runaways there and things, like people that were like looking for a new kind of like family and things. And I think you can find that, and people were going to New York, looking for that. Like someone like Shelley is kind of like of that time, where she came, she was obviously, unhappy at home, and, small town life, and this idea of like celebrity, like people like Edie being in magazines, and you can open the magazines and there's this whole different life. So you go to New York and you find these people, and your friends suddenly became way more important than your family. That was all new, as kind of like individualization arose like in the 1960s. But like I feel like I don't know. I've never, I don't know if I've ever been part of a scene, but at the same time, I think like right now, in like in culture now, I feel like that scene and everything becomes it becomes corrupted much quicker. Like things are swallowed much quicker now, So you might see, like a cool musician, or their first song is cool, and then like a week later they're on the like they're on an ad, because like there's people to absorb this kind of coolness like so much quicker, and I don't think that things get to like flourish in the way they did it in the early days of the factory, or people get to arise like naturally in like the way that Warhol did it. I think they're co-opted, quick,
Monetized.
totally monetized, just so
Right.
quick now.
Well, and
uh,
I think too that it's a two-way street. So
yeah.
there's like the people who wish to monetize it so that they
Mhm.
can share in the profit somehow, but there's also the need to monetize it because rents are so fucking high.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, so you don't
these,
get to enjoy your time, with your
right.
friends or whatever it was.
Yeah. I mean, you can't flourish and just
Mm.
kind of have the thing be out in left field unless you're living someplace where there's a lot of like interesting, creative young people all living
Mm.
somewhere where you can get by working,
Yeah.
20 hours a week or whatever it was and still pay your rent.
Same.
And like, so it's tough,
Yeah.
and I feel like too, like maybe the reason I never wound up in a scene is because I'm so kind of a homebody. I mean, unless the scene comes to my garage, like this is you're in my scene. This is my scene right here.
I don't think I could be in a scene, or like I don't know, maybe I am in but like I'm just so naturally suspicious. I feel
Right?
like I would be. I'm not a joiner.
Me
So
neither.
yeah. So if the scene would have to really beg me
Okay.
to join.
Can we go off on a sidebar? This idea of not being a joiner, because I
Yeah.
have this feeling, I have this thought or this feeling often, and I don't voice it publicly because I'm afraid
Mm.
everyone's going to come down on me, or I'm afraid I have some sort of blind spot. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrongheaded about this, but like whenever I see people identifying publicly and sort
Mm.
of like in a chest thumping way, like I'm an American,
Mm.
I'm Irish, I'm this,
I
I'm
do
that.
say I'm always like that though.
I know, people do, but I'm just like, you know what?
Yeah.
This isn't good for us. The larger human project,
Mm.
when we all start to break, because as soon as somebody says I'm Irish, and if you're not Irish, then it's like, well, I guess I'm excluded. And it kind of, it we're in a weird subconscious, small but significant way. I
Yeah.
think it sort of like divides us and it makes
Mm.
people feel tribalized. And like, I think in my head, I'm like, we just need to stop this. Stop identifying with a religion. Stop
Mm.
identifying with a country, a race, a
Mm.
ethnicity, whatever it is. Stop it. We are
Mm.
earthlings. That's it. Full
But
stop.
I also feel like the tribes now, or the kind of this kind of celebrity thing that I'm sort of interested in. I feel like I explored a bit in this book. It's like people will be identifying, certainly online, as like I'm a Swiftie,
Uh huh.
or I'm a whatever. This kind of dedication, this loyalty to like one celebrity,
It's
which is
weird.
just like it's sort of arisen like in the last, to an extreme degree in the last few years, I feel. Um,
Taylor Swift is maybe like the most Warholian
yeah,
celebrity you could possibly imagine because it is approaching like religious fervor, at least as I
yeah,
bear
it
bear
it
wit-
is. It
I
is almost religious. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and I mean like great pop star. I mean, it's not for me, but like
yeah.
salute, like great
Mm.
songwriter, like I understand like the
Mm.
appeal, but the intensity of the fandom is
Mm.
separate from her.
Yeah.
And it's almost like connected to, I guess, whatever she represents to people,
Mm.
or some way that people find their identity in her. And maybe she's like a genius at cultivating that, both through her
Mm.
work and through like however she presents herself publicly. But there are going to be dissertations written about it.
Oh
Like
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
really fascinating to me, and it's beyond my scope of understanding. I just kind of pass by on the internet, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like,
But then it's almost, it's a double-edged sword because, these people, if they do one thing wrong, Taylor Swift obviously had that boyfriend and people were like disapproving. And then, they were like, we'll stop following her. Like, the exchange they feel with this person that's never met them or owes them nothing, this kind of like demand, is very
the parasocial relationship, right?
oh, very strange and getting stranger, I think, and like is very worthwhile for a novel because it's getting so bizarre. And you can see a little bit with Valerie Solanas and Warhol. Like I obviously he
And she's the Valerie Solanas is the woman who shot Andy
yeah
Warhol.
yeah and he like I really do feel like she when whether he did or he didn't owe her anything, she felt like he owed her, like he owed her something, and she wasn't well, like she was like probably like she had certain problems and things, but I find that that desire to get something from a celebrity is that intense need has only gotten worse and worse, and maybe even worse since COVID, where everyone was kind of living online and kind of like indulging in these kind of fantasies and things. I feel, yeah, I feel like it's kind of scary a little bit.
I have no like. I gotta say, I'm one of these people who. Have you been around a celebrity before? Ever been like in proximity to one?
I've met one or two, yeah.
How did it feel for you? I'm curious.
I just think after a while, everyone, and like, that's the thing, like, everyone is so into celebrity and stuff, and you're like, oh, if I met this celebrity, it probably wouldn't even be that fun, though. Like, it probably just be like, oh, I wish I was out with my friends. Like, I do probably think most of your friends are funnier than most celebrities, so at least, like, more fun.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it's the pure novelty, but it's not some. I write about celebrity, but I don't think I don't have a devotion to any celebrity, and there's very few people I would be like overwhelmed to meet.
I'm trying to think of who it would be for me. I live in Los Angeles, so of course
Mm.
I see
Yeah,
celebrities
you
like
would see so many all the time.
somewhat frequently, and all I ever
Yeah,
say is that it's like celebrity is like a third party entity. It's separate from the
hmm
person who is
yeah,
famous.
yeah,
And so they come in, like you'll be at the grocery store and suddenly
mm,
you'll see some actor that you recognize. And it's honestly, for me anyway, it's anxiety inducing because I'm like,
mm,
oh shit, I recognize them. There's like celebrity is in the room. It's me, it's this person, and
yeah,
their celebrity exists as this sort of like vapor or something in the
mm,
room. And then you can feel that they feel that you notice them and they sort of like it, but they also hate it and they just want to like get their fresh fruit or whatever
yeah.
or their green juice.
They
And
like to after themselves.
yeah, and the great irony of the whole thing is that I'm not an approacher. I would never go up to somebody and be
Oh,
like
I
a
don't.
selfie. I cannot do any of it. I would never do that. Like that just doesn't interest me. And so I am trying to sort of not notice. This happened to me with Leonardo DiCaprio years
Oh,
ago
that is a good one.
at the grocery store.
Mm,
I'm wheeling my cart down the aisle, and he's walking down the aisle towards me with, I think, his dad. And I gave an Oscar worthy performance of being a person who did not recognize Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm
yeah.
like looking to the side. I'm like, oh, because I almost like turned around. There's all these things that you kind of like reflexively do. And then I just sort of looked like really, concentratedly
Mm,
down and to my right and just sort of like went past him.
mm.
But I hate the fact that why should I feel a responsibility to do that?
Yeah.
You're the one who wanted to be famous, like
It must be so weird to be these people. That's what I always find.
yeah.
But I also think that like I'm not that interested in celebrity or whatever, but I am quite easily enthralled. And if I feel like someone's I'm very charismatic or like very funny or like I will be like, oh, like, I'll think that person, like, in a minor celebrity, like a small town celebrity, minor celebrity kind of way. I'll be like, yes, like they're exciting. I think I would have been interested in the factory because I would have been like, they're exciting. They're going out every night. They're doing this. They're like, I think I would have found them. Um, I would have found that intoxicating, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the wild, like the pure wildness of the
Yeah.
scene, especially for people of a certain age.
Mm.
If you're in your 20s and you're hanging around with people like Onadine,
Yeah.
who are like just, and
Mm.
Edie Sedgwick, who
Mm.
just, is kind of supermodel beautiful and living like a rock star,
Mm.
essentially, that's going to be intoxicating in more ways than one. I can see the allure, but
But I also feel like they had no real sense of like, there was a lot of tragedy in the factory, like a lot of suicides, overdoses, and things like that. And these people didn't really have a sense of self-preservation. Like, there was no ambition. I like not like I said, like not in the way we're seeing it now, where they're like, I'll get this brand deal, and I'll get the next brand deal, and things like that. The way that we're living was sort of like honestly or honest to themselves, and if their desire for attention had no drive behind it, like no drive for money maybe, but like other than the attention itself, which is what I think makes it sort of different to now.
yeah, it's like attention was the currency.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's funny, like, because I think that's problematic in terms
Mm.
of like psychological well-being. Like, if that's what you're
Hmm.
after in a consistent way, you're probably not going to be well.
Yeah.
And yet, the notion that somebody would only be interested in the attention without
Mm.
any thought of how to monetize it seems
Mm.
quaint.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
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 So, anyway, those were the good old days.
Yeah.
Suicides, overdoses, and attention as currency. It was just really that was
No.
it's
No.
the halcyon era of the attention economy. But
Mm.
I want to talk to you about New York City as an
Hmm.
Irish woman
Yeah.
who is sort of writing out of her like physical environment. You're
Mm.
set this book in New York, which presents challenges.
Mm.
It would present challenges to me as a non-New Yorker and somebody who has never lived there, but maybe
Mm.
a little bit more so for somebody who's writing from across the Atlantic. And
Yeah.
I read that you, as your inspiration, drew upon Stanley Kubrick's portrayal of New York in Eyes Wide Shut,
Mm. Yeah.
which when I read it, I was like, like not only did I see that in the novel, like with
Mm.
the benefit of that knowledge, like thinking back on it, but I also thought that's a very shrewd choice
Mm.
for somebody who's trying to render this from a distance.
Mm.
So, like, what is it for people who might not
Mm.
be tuned into what we're talking about? What is it about Eyes Wide Shut and its portrayal of New York that influenced you?
Well, I love Eyes Wide Shut.
As do
It's
I.
it's one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
And I'm actually writing about a couple right now. Um,
What, in a
on,
future book?
in a new novel, yes, yes.
Okay.
And I'm like, I was making a big looking list, and I'm like, what are the big coupley things? What are the films I need to rewatch and things? And it's just like Eyes Wide Shut is just like the one, isn't it? But the thing with Stanley Kubrick was he was afraid of flying, so he built New York on like a sound stage, on like a sound stage in London, I think. And it makes the film feel even stranger than it already is, because everything's just like a little off. Um, and the size of the buildings and things are like when Tom Cruise is walking through the streets, things are just like a little wrong. And that's how I wanted New York to feel, because the large amount of it is in May's memory, um, rather than I'm not a huge writer of place. I'm always kind of talking about this, but even in my stories and stuff, I'm just not. I grew up in like a very I feel like I'm insulting my town when I say this, but I grew up in a very small town in like the middle of Ireland, and
What's it
this
called?
town, Kinnegad.
I don't know. Say that again?
Kinnegad.
Kinnegad. Okay.
Yeah, it's like Mullingar. It's a bigger town. But Kinnegad is a very small town, and it's only one street. And you've got like pubs and like shops, and there's not a huge amount on it. And the Midlands is like full of these towns. This is like they're just towns you drive through. Like people don't even recognize the names. They're just like, I'm driving through to get from Dublin to the west of Ireland, and it doesn't even register. So I feel like when I was writing my stories, these are the towns I was thinking of. Like I wasn't like I'm not like I wasn't thinking of particular like places and things, because places never register. I grew up in a sort of nowhere place, so place never really
Right.
registered with me. Although I'm trying to do something a little different now, but I feel that's I wanted to write New York like May would see it, as someone who grew up there and lived there for a long time, not like someone who's like, I walked down here and I went to this and I saw the Empire State Building and then I saw this bridge and I like went and saw this building. I just didn't think that would feel truthful to me. So I wanted it to be a sort of an odder version of New York. But I write all my places odd.
It's
All
all,
my stories are odd.
but it's like the way that I would characterize it is that this book, you're very good at interior space.
Hmm.
You're more concerned with the
Yeah.
interior space as exterior space. And so the way that New York is experienced for the reader in this book is through the interior of May, who, as a local and as a particular kind of person, perhaps is not like clocking every single last
No,
thing. As you're
no,
talking, I'm thinking of my wife,
no.
who has a gift for this. Like we can
Yeah.
drive through a new part of town or like
Mm.
we'll go someplace on vacation, someplace we've never been before. We'll be in the rental car, we'll drive in, we'll find our Airbnb, whatever it is, and then I'll be like, wow, where should we eat? And she'll just start listing off where all the restaurants are.
That's handy.
She can clock a place and remember what every retail, like no matter what, it just sticks in her head. And I can live in Los Angeles for 25 years. I don't know where anything is
Mm.
still. I'm still not like tuned into my environment. I don't
Yeah.
care where the Rite Aid is. You know what I'm saying? I'm
Yes.
not thinking about it that
Yeah.
way. But I guess it's,
I don't think about place hugely either. And I've lived in Dublin for years. I live here now, and I've lived here. I went to college here and everything. So like I feel, but yet I haven't written like a Dublin story. I haven't written like, and I just think I'm so involved with my characters that I write character studies, and it's how they see the place they are, and it's all kind of funneled through their psychology. So I feel like my place is very just linked to character, which makes it different. Anyway, otherwise.
yeah. I think
Mm.
we're just lost in our own heads, maybe. That's what it
Not paying attention.
is. Yeah, right.
Very bad eyesight as well. So I'm actually probably not seeing the place.
I don't have that excuse. Maybe I should start using it. I just can't see. That's what it
Yeah.
is. So another thing that this book has a lot to do with, and I think speaks to contemporary times. It's useful. Like it's a useful perspective. I think for readers to sort of assess the times that we live in, especially maybe female readers, which has to do with the limits of the female experience, which have changed for the better in many respects since the time of, the factory in the 60s and the women who were working there, women like May and Shelley. But one of the things that's really great about this book as a character study is the ways that May and Shelley both understand and intuit the limits that the culture is placing upon them
Mm-hmm.
as women in this world and what's possible for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only an issue of their own personal experience, but you can also see it as they're maybe observing in passing Edie, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of that to this book. That was certainly
Mm-hmm.
on your mind, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, definitely. Like, and I was thinking about, like the 60s was such kind of like presented to women as like, it was a beginning of like, you can be whatever you want, and then there was like the secretary role, like the typewriter was huge, like this like typewriter as the idea of escape, and I think even like the way Shelley and May relate to their typewriters, they really, I think at one point May is like they were almost becoming part of the machine. Um, and I think at the same time, the experiences that are being presented to them, the girls coming in to audition for the films and the girls like the extremely glamorous, beautiful women that are want to be in your Warhol set and things like that experience isn't accessible to them. And I think that they're being confronted with that, like in many different ways, and sort of the lie of, of who they are. They think like May convinces herself she's like a writer, but she's just there typing, doing what she's told, and things, and as are the other three girls. Like I think she makes kind of digs at this other kind of secretary in charge, Danita, who thinks she's more important than she is. This sort of, they were still there, doing women's work, doing secretarial work basically, but the place was just a bit more glamorous. And yeah, I think I was like, in some ways, like I feel like I was exploring my own kind of experiences as well with like work and what I've experienced in my own life, and the kind of limits of what's available to you. And May comes from a family where she's, they're not very wealthy, they're not very well connected, they're not very, she drops out of school and things like that, and she doesn't seem to understand like that she's writing these letters to these incredibly wealthy families and things, like asking for money. And yeah, she's struggling to get into a world that she's trying to have access to, yeah.
We haven't even brought up May's mother, which is central to the book. But May's mother is a boozer and a waitress,
Yeah.
like a career waitress. And May sort of grew up in this diner where her mother works, getting free milkshakes and kind of bearing witness to, just the whole scene. Like not only like her mother's work life, but also the kinds of people who show up in this diner repeatedly, of whom Mikey is one, right? Mikey is one of the guys who is sort of a regular, and that's how he came into their lives. But I think you said earlier, this is a book of twos. There are a lot of pairs in this book. There's May and Shelley, who I think are most central, but there's also May and her mother. There's also May and Mikey. Like there's lots of these two relationships. Was that something that you set out to do intentionally, or was it something that you sort of realized about your book after the fact?
Well, the thing was, I really wanted to show May at like different points in her life, to show that she like left the factory, but it still had a kind of impact on her and things. And I knew that I wanted to kind of thread those things through. And then her mother sort of became, as they do, a more central figure than I initially planned her to. You start writing someone, and then you're like, oh, this is good actually. Like I think this is what she would sound like. This is who she is. And I the same with Mikey. He came into it like a little bit more, and I didn't really want to funnel that down. But I guess her and Shelley's relationship, like friendship, is the main friendship, and is the main relationship in it. But I wanted her to have all these little different relationships, like you do in life, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And there's like, I love the friendship between Shelley and May. Has this great kind of offbeat quality to it, and it feels really lived in, and their dialogue is excellent, and the ways they sort of insult each other to their face, the way that friends can. It felt true to life to me, because you'll be like, oh, wait, are they in a fight? And then like a second later, they're like skipping down the street together or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is how
they're really performing for each other, I think, Shelley and May. And I think that there you have a real, May has a real affection for Shelley, even though she's this sort of odd character, and she doesn't fit anywhere. And I think that friendship that arises is very true. Very true to her, and I really wanted to write like even amongst all of the stuff that's happening, they have this real friendship,
Well, I think there's a line in the book where May is sort of assessing her friendship with Shelley, and she says something to the effect of like, Shelley could actually see me, or she saw the real me, right?
Yeah, there's a line that I don't know what it is, but there's something like she was never like looking kind of outside herself, like she always like saw you, rather than what you're some idea of herself, Shelley's like, she wants to impress these people, and she's always got a desperation about it because she has no family there and everything, but also she is like kind of completely herself in other ways. So I found that interesting to write. I like writing friendship anyway. I write a lot of friendships.
I think so. I think it's very fast. Like maybe the most fundamental kind of human relationship. I mean, I guess family relationships are maybe the most fundamental, but there's something about friendship that, especially if you're dealing with characters of a certain age, that gets a little bit more open and interesting most of the time. And I think too, there's a difference between, say, a friendship and then a work friendship, and like a family and what they call a work family here in the United States.
Yeah.
I don't know if is this a term too in Ireland, where people, I sort of bristle at that, but I think that being friends with people in a work context is weird oftentimes, and this idea of work being a family is often bullshit. I don't think
Yeah.
they're
I
not they're
think
not they're not your
yeah,
family. They'll
it's true. And I think that that's kind of positioned to you as like, to keep you in the office longer hours and you should all socialize together, but so you feel indebted to your company or your boss in a way that you absolutely should not. But I do find something about like work friendships like kind of funny because if you think about them, you're thrown together in a way that with these people that you might normally never hang out with. And I think like a lot of terrible jobs I've had, like working in bars and different places and things, and like the only reason like you see someone there and you're like you're the reason I'm like I'm here, you're my reason to get through the day, because you have just like a good like friendship with this person. They get you, and I really like writing those kind of surprising friendships because they kind of, it's not planned, it catches you off guard, and they could be any age or like come from anywhere, and suddenly they're like your best pal.
Well, yeah, it's like the person at work with whom you can actually be honest
Yeah.
without
Just
fear
feel
of
rolling your eyes in all the meetings.
yeah, without fear of retribution. That person, it's funny. Like I think back to a job I had, which was particularly stressful and kind of awful, and I'm still friends with the one dude at work who I could just be like, this is a joke, But everybody else, you're sort of on guard. You don't know,
Yeah.
like exactly where you stand or what somebody might say to somebody else if you actually get truthful. And man, that is not a situation I like to be in, where you just can't be honest about how you're seeing things. It's weird. It's a weird way to be. So before I let you go, I want to know, you mentioned that you grew up in a town with like one street. Any traffic lights or no?
One set.
One set.
In the middle of the town.
Okay.
Opposite the church. Yeah.
So do you come from bookish people? Like, or did you grow up with readers?
My dad's a teacher, or was a teacher before he retired. So
Oh, okay.
very bookish. And
A teacher of what?
English.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So that was it.
We all are big readers actually, and like very fast readers, which is great because then I'd be like, read this, and then I have someone to discuss it with. My sister is a very fast reader as well. So.
You can speed read?
Oh, like just quick, just like very quick. Because my friends, like some of my friends from home and stuff, like they read, but like it'll take them like 2 or 3 weeks to read a novel. I'm like, I don't have time. I've already moved on from that novel. I don't want to talk about that anymore. So my sister is very reliably good for someone to talk to with these things.
Well, okay. So answer me this. How are you fast? Like, is it because you just sit down for like 4 hours at a stretch? Or is it because you actually are like, your eyes are moving more quickly? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is it?
I can just sit down and read for like a good while. I think it's actually one of the like the few good remaining skills that I still have. I have quite good concentration, I think. So I can still read for like a like long uninterrupted stretches.
Maybe that has something to do with growing up in a small town.
Yeah, because when you grow up in a small town, you're just bored. You're really bored a lot of the time,
Which is good.
It's good to be bored.
Yeah, we don't have boredom anymore. That got like
that is the one thing that, not one thing, but one of the ideas, that Warhol had, the kind of boredom. He's got the film Empire, where you watch the Empire State Building until the lights come on for hours and hours and hours, and I find all those ideas like fascinating. I think boredom is like, I think it's like a key to being creative in some ways. I don't think like being stimulated all the time is like works for anyone.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Pro boredom.
Pro boredom over here.
Do you have a TV?
Oh yeah.
You do?
I watch TV. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have and I guess your dad was a teacher, so you're not. I'm picturing you on some sort of farm, but you didn't live on a farm.
No. I was like, no, and then I was like, no. Actually, I did live very near a farm. There was like a farm behind my house. So yeah.
Did you grow up with dogs?
No, cats.
Cats. Okay. I used to have a border collie, so anytime I'm talking to somebody from the UK or Ireland, I'm just like imagining them. I have this like fantasy of one day living on like some sort of farm with just lots of border collies.
Oh, you could definitely do that here.
I know. I love those dogs. It's like my favorite animal. But
yeah.
And then you went to Trinity. That's where you said you studied
Theater and film.
But then pivoted to literature.
Yes.
Why?
There was no real reason I didn't want to be an actor. And I started writing plays in the third year of college, and I really enjoyed writing plays. But the thing about being a playwright is it's very hard to get like a play staged, and you need like, lots of actors and director and money. And the thing about like writing short stories, which is what I started writing then, is like you don't need any of that. You can do everything. Like that is like if you're like a bit of a control freak, you can like costumes, like music, you're in charge of everything.
Listen, I studied film too. I had the same exact trajectory.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to tell stories. And I just knew film because I grew up in a screen culture.
Yeah.
Even back in my day, we were still like movies and TV were predominant, and then you start to realize like, oh, you've got to collaborate and raise money and do all this stuff, and I was like,
and
forget
it can be
this.
very slow. Whereas like if you have an idea, you can sit down and write it to its conclusion. However, writing can be very slow too, but not as slow as kind of relying on a lot of other people.
So if you're a fast reader, are you a fast writer?
No.
Okay, good. I was going to be very angry with you. I was going to be angry with you if you were like, yes, they shoot right out of me. I wrote this novel in 2 weeks.
God, no, I'm a very slow writer. This took me 3 or 4 years. So I'm envious of fast writers. Wish I was faster.
What was the biggest challenge for you? Because like you said, you started in short stories and sort of made your name initially as a writer of short stories, and I think this is your first novel, right? So, can you talk a little bit about the transition and like what the learning curve was like for you?
I wrote a collection of stories that came out in 2019, and I think that
which is called
Show Them a Good Time.
Show Them a Good Time.
Mm-hmm. And then I think the change for me was I had to kind of learn. I thought it would just be the same as writing stories, but it really wasn't. And I had to learn like voice. Like there's stuff you can do with voice in like 10 pages that you can't do in a novel. Like you would stay with a voice for 10 pages, but you won't stay with it for 250 pages. So I kind of had to pare back and do things that are like plotty stuff that I didn't have to do before. That's what, like, I'm a big rewriter and all that took like a lot of time. But it's good to learn, I wanted to try something different, and it's good to do something different. I knew I always wanted to write a novel. So yeah.
And it's more, it's theoretically more saleable, right? That's what the general sense of it is over here. I don't know if it's any different in Ireland if short fiction
we
has...
We actually really like short stories here now. We they don't make much money, but we have a lot of magazines and we have a good story culture. So that's nice.
Ireland's got a good literary culture in general. That's the way I conceive of it. I just talked to Declan Mead on this show.
Did you?
I did, yeah.
He's my editor.
I know. Oh, for this book?
No, for the last one.
Oh, we'll see. Yeah, I think he did actually bring you up in the conversation. He was singing your praises. He was giving you a plug.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
So I talked to him about The Stinging Fly and its success, and it just got written up in the New York Times, which I'm sure you saw.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting and interesting.
Yes, it's like someone like Declan has like been brilliant for like the short story culture in Ireland, like and The Stinging Fly, like they have 3 issues a year, and the editor Lisa McInerney is fantastic, and they've had like a series of great editors like Danny Denton and Sally Rooney, and all of that is like it's really been I feel like I'm always reading brilliant stories in Ireland, but I'm always reading brilliant stories in the New Yorker or whatever. I just feel like people don't go out and buy story collections like they go out and buy novels, like people are always like, what novel are you bringing on holidays and things? People just don't read them in the same way. I don't know why.
Well, and you said earlier you're working on a new novel.
Yeah.
Any hints as to what it's about?
Yeah. It's about a couple.
Oh, that's right.
They're it's set in a hotel, like in a spa. In Ireland this time.
In Ireland.
So, yeah.
What part of Ireland? Any?
Actually, it's going to be in the Midlands. So yeah, I'm gonna.
Which is where you're from.
Yeah, safe ground in this one.
Okay. You should know. As well as you can know a place, you should know that place.
I'm always worried people are going to correct me about this novel. The next one, I'll be like, oh no.
Well, I have enjoyed meeting you, and
it's lovely to meet you.
enjoyed Nothing Special and getting sort of what's the word? Like a sideways window into the world of Andy Warhol, like a different perspective than maybe we've gotten before. And it's refreshing. And I think it casts new light on that whole scene, right? It's like sort of the point of the project. And you also are a great sentence writer, which I think has been noted in a lot of the reviews and interviews that I've read with you preceding this conversation. There's a really unique music to your writing, and the dialogue is great, the depictions of friendship, but I don't know, I'm really bad at talking about prose. I can't stand it, but it's like, but yet I feel the urge to, because it's so notable and it's part of what makes this book so enjoyable and also kind of mysterious, because I'm like, how did she do this? But one of the things that somebody wrote, which made it make sense to me, is that, like, there's a lot of surprises in your sentences. They sort of come at you from odd angles, but the way that I always characterize it is that it's like just offbeat music. It's just slightly offbeat, and it does things that are unexpected, and there's a consistency to it that makes it like integrated. That's like as a total piece of music. It's not like there's just like one strange line here or there. Like, this whole thing is written like this. So I don't know how you do that. If you can tell us how you do that, I'd be all ears. I'm sure you have no idea.
No, I don't really. I do think a lot about, though, sentences, and like, I'm a big fan of, probably to my editor's like annoyance, but I'm a big fan of the long paragraph, like the long hefty paragraph, and it's got to look a certain way, and it's got to feel a certain way, and that's just how I enjoy writing. And I'm also quite like, I think I'm, like a little bit evasive. I withhold certain things and things. Like, I feel like that's a short story writer trait. So yeah, if I tried to write any differently now, I think I would have trouble. So this is just, it's the way it is.
It's the way it is. And you said earlier too that you're a big rewriter. So a lot of this stuff is sort of hammered out in the revisions.
Yeah.
All right, Nicole. Well, I know you got to get somewhere, so I'm going to let you go. But I have loved talking with you. Congrats again.
Thank
and
you.
best of luck on the as yet untitled new novel about a couple in the Midlands.
Oh, I have a title.
Oh, what would you be willing to share?
Yeah, it's called Something Unpleasant.
Okay, so we have what? Show them what you've got.
Show them a good time.
Oh, show them a good time. Nothing special.
Something unpleasant.
And something unpleasant. I like these titles.
Thank you.
Yeah, there seems to be some sort of thematic unity. I got to figure out what it is, but
yeah.
All right. Well, listen. Thank you. Best of luck to you.
Thanks so much.
And maybe we'll talk again down the road.
Yeah. Thank you.